Ah, welcome back. Okay, so let's talk about media and globalism. So, one of the things that we need to sort of talk about is how media has changed. Okay, and by media, I mean all of media, right? Media includes television and radio and books and newspapers and any way that we share information as a part of the media landscape, right? It just gets distributed in different ways. Now, how we look at media has changed dramatically in the last 50 years. And what do I mean by that? Well, as an example, I'm not 50 years old yet. But when I was a kid, I grew up with like 5 TV channels, right? There's 5 TV channels. That was it. And I had the radio. And I had the newspaper. And that was pretty much how I got all of my information. I could, watch one of those 5 TV stations. For here in Denver, it was Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 6, 7, 9, and then eventually it was Channel 31, and then Channel 20 came in. Right? And because I had a TV that only had like 13 positions on a dial, right? And channel 31 was channel 13. So I had limited TV, right? Not even a remote. Oh my God, so long ago. Anyway, so there's limited access to media. A lot of people got their daily news not from watching CNN or Fox News or any of those places, but by reading the newspaper, and every town usually had at least one newspaper, sometimes more. In Denver, we had the Denver Post and the Rocky Mountain News as our big ones. And then whatever town you lived in, there was probably a local newspaper that dealt with local issues. And that's how we traded information. That's not the case anymore, right? And things have changed drastically. Even for journalism has had a massive change in how it reports. And it's really important to understand how this has changed and why this is changing. If we go back and look at like newspapers, well, who here actually reads newspapers anymore, right? Not a lot of people. Every once in a while, I'll check out the New York Times, but it's all online. I don't actually have a physical paper anymore. In fact, a lot of papers have been shifting to digital, and because that's the case, because people aren't consuming a lot of their news now by the written word, they're watching it on their TV. They've got cable, right? And you've got CNN, NBC, CNBC, Fox, C-SPAN, and then, so you've got all of those, and then you got all the local stuff that's going on, and then you got all these other news stations that are coming up, and then you get to online, and then you get like Facebook, and then you've got all these different other places to consume news, right? And it's changed, right? We're seeing less and less newspapers, and those journalists are leaving for other venues. And we are consuming information in a different way, right? Oftentimes, taking the time to read a newspaper was kind of an event. Like you actually had to take time to sit down and read what was going on. Now, we sit down on the couch, and you got the TV there, you got your laptop up there, and you're flicking between browsers, and you're looking at this, and you're watching the TV, and then your phone goes off, and you're like, oh, I've got a new like on Facebook, and because of some post that you made that was an article that, you know, you found online about something that was really interesting. It's changed, right? How we consume information has changed drastically. What used to be controlled, right? Journalism used to be a very controlled entity. There were a certain code of ethics that was used in journalism. That sometimes things would be done in a way that might not always be ethical, but might also be more appropriate, right? Things might be a little bit different. And for better or worse, things have changed drastically. One of the things that always comes to mind is Walter Cronkite. If you don't know who Walter Cronkite is, you should totally look him up. The thing about Walter Cronkite was that he just gave you the news, right? Didn't have an opinion. Today, this happened, and blah, 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 and blah, 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 and this happened, and this person said this. It's not a good impersonation, but you get the idea. Here's the thing. This is what happened. He told the news. No opinion. No, this is what you should think about this, or this is what you should consider about that. You know, he told facts, right? This is what happened. This is what this person said. This is the event that took place and why it should, and not whys, but just the hows, right? This is how it happened. Today's media gets into a lot of why things are going on, but it's speculative. It's editorial at best. You know, journalism itself has changed dramatically in how it gets told. And this is really important to understand the difference between, you know, the reporting of information and the sort of consumption of information, and how you might have the ingredients over here of what's going on, but how it gets turned into something else, right? How it gets turned into something consumable can change in this process. And that's where you see a lot of the online or cable news hosts that come on, is that oftentimes they're not exactly telling you the news. And one important thing, you know, that I found very interesting is that Tucker Carlson of Fox News was just in a legal battle. And the Fox lawyers came out and said that Tucker Carlson is not a source of news. His program is considered entertainment and not a good source of news. And I found that absolutely fascinating. For one, that someone that has such an influence on events that go on and is seen as a reliable source of information is also being considered by his own company not to be a reliable source of information. That it is more editorial, that this is how, you know, I think versus what is actually happening. So whether or not you like Tucker Carlson or not, as an anthropologist, doesn't matter, right? It's understanding how that flow of information is being changed. Now, the same thing can be said for the opposite side of the political spectrum. There are people out there that do it for entertainment's sake, right? And somebody that I would bring up would be like Stephen Colbert, right? And I love watching Stephen Colbert, but a lot of the stuff that he does is done for comedy, and it's done as an editorial, right? Not necessarily going deep dive into the facts. You know, it's more about, you know, making you laugh or making you think about something. But it's his opinion, right? It's not the Walter Cronkite telling of the news. It's like we're going to poke fun at the news, and we're going to do it in a humorous way. And Colbert has certainly gotten very serious over the last, certainly the last year and over the last 4 years because of his obvious distaste for Trump. But at the same time, we have to understand where that information is coming from and who is saying it and what is the reason why they are saying it. You know, why is Tucker Carlson talking about the things that he's talking about, and what kind of an impact does he expect to have on the people consuming it? And the same is said for like Stephen Colbert. You know, what is he saying, and how is he intending that information to have an impact on his audience? And those audiences don't often intermix, right? If you watch Colbert, you probably don't watch a lot of Tucker Carlson, and vice versa, right? Because there is a big political divide there. So mainstream news has changed drastically over the last 50 years. And it's important to understand that when you are consuming that news, even on an individual basis, not even on an anthropological basis, but on an individual basis, that critical thought, you must engage in critical thought whenever you are listening to someone talk, listening to someone give you the news, you know, and what is the information that's being given to you. You know, if you're hearing, you know, somebody talk to you about how things could change, could be, wanna be, you know, all that stuff, I put a lot of emphasis on skeptical, right? You know, because it's a lot of times it's editorial. It's people telling their opinions. Versus like, this is how many people showed up today. That's probably a good solid number that you can follow, right? And there's probably, if you're pulling out numbers, there's probably ways of backing up those numbers, right? And this is an event, and this is what we need to look at. So, you know, pay attention to what's being said, who is saying it, and ask the question, why are they saying it? And this will help you as an anthropologist as well, you know, to try and understand the motivations, right? Who's saying what and why? Let's see here. I think I clicked. Okay. Part of the thing that's changed dramatically is our technology, right? The reason why we've lost newspapers and we've gone to internet and cable and all that stuff is because our technology has changed so that we can easily consume information, right? You know, pretty much everybody's got one of these, you know, smartphone or a laptop or a tablet of some sort. They've got access to the internet, right? And so you've got access to all these different news sources. You know, you can go onto YouTube and look up any subject, you know, that's going on. Take a political subject. Go online, type it in, and all of a sudden have 30 or 40 different ideas on that particular subject, right? All these different views. None of it's necessarily news, right? It's opinion. It's people's ideas and thoughts on it. And that's not to say that they're not just as important, right? It's not necessarily that information that they're giving isn't important to understand. Because as an anthropologist, your idea is to like go out and say, what are the people saying? And that's why I love YouTube. I absolutely adore YouTube because it gives us a glimpse into what people, normal people, maybe not always normal, but what they're doing and why they're doing it. It's fantastic. It gives us an idea of it gives people access to, and this is, you know, this concept that we talked about earlier, polyvocality, right? Polyvocality, multiple voices. it gives us a chance to hear the people's voice. And in our society, YouTube is the place to do that. Unless you're into TikTok. I'm not even sure. I've seen some TikTok, and it kind of reminds me of like Vimes. I think that's what they were. Hi bear. No, we're gonna have to wait just a few minutes, okay, buddy? But it gives us an opportunity to observe what's going on, and this is where even Facebook is an amazing tool for the cultural anthropologist. And it all comes with a caveat, okay? And this is something that we have to also understand, is that, you know, Facebook is people's opinions, right? They're posting their ideas, their thoughts on online, and they're posting videos and all this stuff. But here's the thing, and this is something that you always have to take into consideration, is that sometimes things are, when people are posting things, they are performative. Okay, what does that mean? Well, sometimes people will say things or do things that aren't necessarily a true reflection of what they think or, you know, have as an ideal, right? Sometimes they will say something that falls in line with the mainstream, or falls in line with the counterculture, or falls in line with something else that, you know, they're trying to express, but they don't quite believe it, you know, or they don't quite fully 100% support it. So sometimes things are performative. And so when you're reading, you know, somebody's post on something, or they are resharing someone else's post, and maybe they fully agree with it, maybe they 80% agree with it, you know, but you see them sharing it, and that's like, oh, this person 100% believes in this because they're sharing it. They share this opinion. And so sometimes you have to sort of have a little bit of doubt when you see somebody post something, a video or something like that. Have that doubt, have that critical thought constantly going on in the background of your mind, that even though you might be watching something that you totally agree with, right? It's like, yeah, no, this person right here, man, I fully agree with what they are saying. You should still have a little bit of doubt and a little bit of critical thought going on, and ask the question why. You know, what's being said, why is it being said, and what is their objectives? Because sometimes people say things that they don't always agree with, right? One of the other things that is great about like YouTube and mass media is that there are some things that aren't being shared, right? And as an example, I look at like the North Dakota pipeline, okay? The North Dakota pipeline is this pipeline that basically cuts through I believe it's the Lakota tribal lands, and was not wanted, right? It went through some burial grounds. It's most pipelines pollute because, you know, they're built substandardly, right? And a lot of times when it goes through like a reservation, even though the reservation might not want it, federal guidelines might still have power to put them there. You know, might still have the ability to do this, or it might be outside of their lands, but it might go through a sacred location, and so it might still have a huge impact on that community. So what happened with the North Dakota pipeline is that it wasn't getting any national coverage, none. But you had these protesters come out and say, stop, you cannot put this pipeline in, And we're basically going to sit here for, I don't know, it was a few months. They had people that were camped there, that were protesting, that were engaged in civil disobedience, right? And nobody covered it. Not a single newspaper or TV station or whatever. Nobody covered it, except for the people on the ground. They had their smartphones out. They had people with cameras, and they started shooting the all these events that were going on. They started recording all of this stuff that was happening. And little by little, it started to garner more and more national attention. It could no longer be ignored. And that would never have happened if we didn't have the technology that we have now, right? If we didn't have smartphones, if we couldn't live stream to Facebook, right, or to YouTube, the events that were taking place there might never have actually been fully understood or appreciated for what was going on. And so social media is sort of taking on this very interesting role within our society when it comes to news. It's a way that we can get news out quicker, and it's a social network. So one person sees it and records it and then posts it, and then a few people see it and they share it and share it and share it, and it gets to be this huge event, right? We see more and more people, sharing and consuming that information. But at the same time, because it's social media, anyone can share anything. And so you also have people that are sharing misinformation, either intentionally or unintentionally. And that's the other thing that you have to understand as well, is that while somebody might post something that is factually wrong, it is done in a way that they believe is factually correct, right? So the intent is good, right? There's good intent behind sharing that information, but it still might be factually wrong, right? And so it's one of those situations where, people might be sharing things that are not true. So that's why, especially in a time where it's hard to tell necessarily what is always factual and what isn't, that you do your best to understand the source of that information and the intent of that information, right? What is the source? Where is it coming from? Is it verifiable, right? This is simple research techniques, right? And then what is the intent of that information? Is it to inform or is it to incite? Are you trying to inform people this is what's going on? Or are you trying to incite people, hey, you should react to this, right? And so that's really important to understand about social media. Trying to understand that, yes, there might be some good stuff out there, and it might be factual, and it might be, really good, solid information, but because there's so much other stuff out there that isn't, all of it needs to be treated with caution, right? And if you're going to cite something or repeat something, you should also critically think about that thing, whatever it is that you're going to, contribute. So social media and stuff like that, it's a fantastic place for an anthropologist to look at and observe and to engage in, and you get so much information. It's fan-freaking-tastic. I love it. I also am cautious of it because it can be misleading, and it's just like anything that you find online. You need to make sure that you're extra careful and you use a lot of critical thought when you're looking at this stuff. I'm going to take a minute to just talk a little bit about visual anthropology. Now, this is my particular field when it comes to, like, doing photography or cinematography, doing documentary films, stuff like that. It's also important to understand context, right? There's the old saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So if you have a photographer out there, every click is an essay. But we also have to understand that there is this concept of the photographer's focus, right? Their view of the world. And that, I might take a picture of this and I might have my video camera out. I might be recording like footage of whatever's going on, but it's this little window, right? What's going on out here? My arms just disappeared. What's going on outside of that box, right? You're seeing one particular aspect of that event taking place. And it's really important to remember this when you're seeing a video, when you're looking at photos of an event going on, that moment in time that is captured is focused on that direct content. But there is much more content out there around it. So while you might see a picture of something going on, what's going on before and after that? And this is an issue that's taken place quite a lot lately, especially when it comes to police and the media when they're sharing that information. The issue is that one like news source might play a part of a clip of like a police event, and it might put the police in a bad light. It's like, well, we have this clip, and this clip says that the police were brutalizing someone. And then another news source is going to say, we have this clip, and it shows this person who did end up getting beat up, but they instigated it, right? And so they'll show the part of the instigation and then the police, starting to engage. But they might not show the part where they brutalize the person. And so now you've got the same source of media, the same information, being expressed in two different ways because of creative editing, right? If you had the entire clip, you might have a much better idea of the event that took place. But because things are oftentimes edited to, especially in current media, to influence, right, one particular group versus another particular group, and this happens all the time in politics, taking things out of context, right? We have to be very critical of these events taking place. So whenever you're watching that footage, whenever you're seeing that picture, ask the question, is this the full picture? I'm seeing this. What does it do to me? Like, what kind of feelings does it incite in me? And if it does that, like, what is my response? And how critical should I be of this? That's the thing about media. And if it's effective media, it's oftentimes linked with an emotional response, right? And that's the hard part. You see somebody getting brutalized by the police, and you're like, screw the police, And then you see the beginning part where this person was antagonizing the police, and you're like, that guy needs to go to jail. And then you put it together, and it's like, well, that guy was kind of asking for it, but he did not deserve to get the crap beat out of him. And all of a sudden you start to see a bigger picture. Whether or not that event that is taking place is good or not, nobody deserves to be brutalized, but nobody deserves to be antagonized either. You know, where's the context? And so when you're watching stuff, look for the context. Look for, is this all of it? You know, if you're going to repost a video of something that takes place, make sure that, you know, you understand the context, what is being said. Sometimes it's blatantly obvious, right? It's blatantly obvious what is going on. For example, like the Charlottesville, right? When you had the neo-Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan, and they're out there shouting white power and all that stuff. That's pretty obvious, right? The context isn't like, well, there's good people there too, right? There isn't. Right? Those are Nazis and they're not good. So that obviously is pretty substantial. So when you look at stuff, you still need to question, right? You still need to ask what's going on. You know, why am I seeing this? What's the response that I'm trying to get drawn out of? And then also compare it to other news sources. What's being shown over here versus what's being shown over here? What does CNN say? What does Fox News say? Right? Are they saying the same thing? Are they showing the same clips? Are they engaging in the same kind of rhetoric? Or are they completely different? So it's really, really important to pay attention to what's being said. And that's, you know, when it comes to visual anthropologists and what we do, we have to take that into consideration. You know, what is the intent of that anthropological voice as an editor, you know, as a researcher, as a writer? How do I take this information in and turn it into something that is appropriate, that is fair, you know, that is representative of the people that I'm working with? And that's a big question, and that's kind of a tough thing to do if you don't understand sort of all the context, right? So, you know, you have to be very, very cautious, you know. And that's the case when you're writing your research papers as well. You should take the same kind of approach. You know, where am I getting my source from? You know, is it reliable? Ethnographic films. You know, one of the things that that I want to mention about this is that, especially some of the early films that we watched early in the semester, we'll take, for example, like Nanook of the North, which, you know, it's still one of my favorite films, but I also know the context to it. You know, I know that Flattery, as he was making this film, wanted to show what it was like to be an Inuit. What was the lifestyle like, you know? But he wanted to show this idealized life, you know? They had guns, but they never showed them with guns, right? Because they did most of their hunting with rifles, because rifles were available at the time. Now, he had a romanticized version of the Inuit that didn't include rifles, right? So he wanted to do that. The guy that he got to play Nanook, that wasn't his actual name, and the woman that he was depicted with was not his actual wife, and those weren't his actual kids. But they still showed what a family of that size would actually do, right? So you're actually getting some factual information, even though it is staged a little bit. So putting that into context, you can understand that, yes, as an ethnographic film, this is both a success and a failure, as long as you can put that into context. If we look at, say, like dead birds, okay, dead birds, as far as like say was a decent film, one that I still like, but it fails in a number of places, and it fails in polyvocality. You hear two voices. Actually, you only hear one voice, and that's the voice of the anthropologist, right? Robert Gardner. And what he is doing is he's giving this description of what it's like to live in this community and the things that are important. And everything that he is saying could very well be factually true, right? All of it could be true. But because it's him saying it and not the individuals themselves that are putting voice to those words, there is a question as to whether or not what he is saying is true. Because we're not hearing it coming from their mouths. We're hearing it from the anthropologist, and we're hearing his ideas and his perceptions on what's going on his ideas, his anthropological editorial expression. And so while everything, again, might be true, everything that we watch could be a perfect representation of that community, we're still not getting the full picture. There's still a question mark there as to the validity of that information. Then we look at a film like The Axe Fight, right? And The Axe Fight is a great film as far as and I love using it as an instructional film of what it's like to actually do some anthropological field work. Because here you are, you're watching this event unfold, you've got your camera out, and you're focusing on all of this stuff that's going on, right? This conflict that's going on. And then he'll pan over here and he'll look at this person over here and then pan over there and look at that person over there. And this is where we have sort of this conflict with like the photographer's gaze, right? What are you seeing and what are you not seeing? Right? Because you have this much focus on the events that are going on versus all the stuff that you're not seeing. So you might be missing out on some of that extra information. But what Tim Ash does in The Axe Fight is that he goes back through and kind of tries to understand what's going on and then corrects himself, right? They were told that something had taken place and that there was this conflict, and then in the second part comes back and says, no, that was a misunderstanding. We were given misinformation, and as we investigated more, we found out that there was more information. And so the Axe Fight goes in and does a great job of understanding sort of like the process of doing field work, and the complications that you run into. And then I like even more the linguists. Those two guys, they go out and they travel all over the world and they're looking at all of this different stuff that's going on, and it all ties in, and it's a great example of modern day ethnographic research. What it takes, the problems that you run into, the fact that you might have people that are going to give you information. They're like, yes, I want to help you, and then you find out that their information isn't appropriate or isn't real to what you're looking for, or that the person that you need the most is the person that's most reluctant to give it to you, right? And so it's about building those relationships as you're doing that research. So, the films, I love ethnographic films, and documentary films and series and all of that stuff. But you also have to remember that whenever you view anything like this, that it is a snapshot in time. That event that is taking place is a snapshot in time. And that 10 years prior to that or 10 years after that, things can have changed. And we have this tendency to sort of memorialize things that happened, right? We see an event that takes place, and then that's how it should be, right? That community should be like that. That's the representation. And we forget that culture changes and that things can have drastically changed in that community since that film or that research was conducted. So whenever you are watching something like that, again, have that critical thought about, what am I watching, and have things stayed the same? Have they changed? And just keep that in mind. One of the really important things to understand too, again, the technology, it's a lot easier now to record this information, right? To do an ethnographic film, you don't need to have the big cameras and I remember one of my first film classes had a guy come in and he brought his camera in, and his camera cost $100,000. It's $100,000 camera, and it could only do high definition. It was a high definition camera. That was it. And now, like I have 3 cameras that can shoot in 4K, and they're all cheap, right around between $150 and $500 for a 4K camera that can shoot quality enough to go into a movie theater. Yeah, things have changed. Things have changed drastically. And people are going out and buying stuff like that all the time. And they are learning how to do that documentary work. And people are gaining access to being able to tell their own stories. And so how film is changing and how we are documenting all of this stuff is changing dramatically, to the fact that, you don't necessarily have to be an anthropologist to record it. The great thing about being an anthropologist is that you can help to understand and translate it, right? And create that bridge between one culture and another culture. And I think that's really the important aspect of what anthropology does, is that it builds those bridges. So again, allowing people to share their voices, right? There are downfalls, right? And I kind of talked about this a little bit. It's about being able to share information, right? Being able to go out and share your knowledge and your experience and your culture and your ideas. And then there's also the people that share the negative things, right? And I hate using the term fake news, because I believe news is news. Opinions are what people share, right? And people are like, well, this isn't happening, or this is happening. And that's not news, right? There's no such thing as fake news, right? It's people that share that information, take an editorial stance, right? The news is facts. News is that's what happened. Think about that Walter Cronkite. The news is events taking place, right? This is what happened, when it happened, and these are the people that were involved when it happened. The basic facts. Then we get into people's opinions. And oftentimes people's opinions are designed to sway your opinion. So you have to keep that in mind when you're watching the news, and what's going on is that oftentimes it's talking heads. It's people saying this and people saying that. Try and think about the facts. What's actually happening? And I don't think it's not unfair to think of it as being a little skeptical. Being skeptical of what's happening in the world and people saying different things is not a bad thing, right? It's about trying to establish an understanding of what's happening and why it's happening and what is the purpose behind it. So use your doubt. Doubt is very important. Allow it to help you ask questions, because it'll help you engage not only in your daily life, but as a researcher, right? You hear something and you're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, but does it? Maybe I need more information. Maybe I need more research. And once I go out there and get more verifiable facts, more verifiable information, then I'm like, okay, I guess this does work. Or I guess, well, there's a conflict here. And having that conflict is okay, right? Having a conflict of information just means that there's a lot of information and people might be saying different things. And understanding that is really important to understanding your research in general. You don't have to deal in absolutes. And I think that's really important for us to kind of understand, just in a general idea, is that anytime we start subscribing to absolutes, absolutely this or absolutely that, it oftentimes absolutely gets us into trouble, right? As a culture, as individuals, it can definitely have a major impact on our lives. So, as a conclusion to this last and final lecture, art is something to experience, right? But it can also be used as a tool, right? Art can be used to influence. It can be used to do positive things. It can be used to do negative things. It can reinforce stereotypes. It can reinforce ideologies, either consciously or subconsciously. How we look at art, especially in the United States, we have this Western cultural view of things go, this universal view on art. And it influences how we consume art and how we look at other cultures. And we have to understand the positive and the negative aspects of that and what it does to other cultures, right? What kind of an impact does it have when we assign fine art versus primitive art, right? And who is doing that work? We talked about how globalism is having a huge impact on different communities that produce art. The giraffes versus the elephants. People want more elephants, so we consume more elephants. And then people produce more elephants, and then the giraffes disappear. And that can have a big impact on the identity of a community that is producing those things, even if they're halfway around the world. So understanding how that art is consumed, right, and how much of a pressure it can have on other communities, on how Coca-Cola can influence other countries, right, can have an impact economically on other countries because of their the consumption of water in making Coca-Cola. And the fact that when I was in Kenya, it was cheaper to buy a bottle of Coke than it was to buy a bottle of water. I'm going to repeat that. It was cheaper to buy a bottle of Coke than it was to buy a bottle of water. Think about what kind of an impact that might have on a community. That if it's cheaper to buy Coke, especially in a community that might be impoverished, right? That if it's cheaper to buy Coke, what kind of a health impact that's going to have on that community. Because it's not going to be a good one, right? It's not going to be a good impact. So, you know, how all of that can have influence, right? How advertising can have influence, how getting that foothold can have an influence, is huge. It's a huge impact. How people are exposed to media, right? Whether or not they have access to different news sources, right? Compared to what we used to have, you know, newspapers and a few TV channels, to the literal thousands of TV channels that we have available to us now if you subscribe to, you know, cable or satellite or internet and YouTube and social media, and Facebook and Instagram and all of that stuff, right? Think about what we have access to and think about who's sharing that information, and understand that, you know, again, it's not necessarily news when it's opinion, right? If you're sharing your opinion about the news, then that's the context it needs to stay within, and that's the context you need to place it within, okay? At the same time, right, we now have voices for everybody, right? Especially in this country, getting your hands on a cell phone and recording your daily thoughts on what's going on is now easier than ever. And it's an aspect of freedom that we've never had before. It gives researchers like myself the opportunity to go out and really, you know, explore what's going on in the world and what people are thinking and what they're doing, but also keeping it all in context that sometimes it's performative, that, you know, maybe this person that's saying this is doing it for a reason, right? And maybe it's not a good representation or a perfect representation of that person and what they think. God, it sounds complicated, right? And that's the thing about anthropology, is that people are complicated. And that's what makes it interesting. You know, you're never going to get a straight answer. You're never going to get the perfect, you know, research. It's all going to be complicated. It's all going to be convoluted. And it's your job to suss it out and put together something that gives us good information, a good representation of that community that is fair and just, right? And do it with as little bias as possible. And hopefully, if you do your job well, you will have had a positive impact on that community and other communities, right? So, you know, when it comes to all of this, you know, I think the big thing that I want everyone to take away is to have critical thought. You know, when you watch something, when you read something, when you are listening to the news, have that little bit of doubt, have that little bit of questioning in the back of your mind, going like, is this really what's going on? Is this the news, or is this an opinion? You know, and understand that both are just as important, right? Listening to Tucker Carlson or Stephen Colbert, both of those voices are just as important, because it gives you the opportunity to understand the different perspectives. Whether or not there's factual truth in what is being said has to be considered. But just the fact that they are sharing that voice and have that platform you can try to understand the impact that their voices are having. And that's an important part of anthropology, is understanding what's being said, what's being expressed, whose information is being shared, what artwork is being shown and whose isn't being shown. Right? What's there and what isn't there. So I think that's it. Pay attention to all the things that are being said. Avail yourself to all of the information being displayed, being talked about, and use your own judgment, to make up your mind when it comes to these subjects. But do your best to take all the available information into context, and question that information. Try and find the source. Try and analyze it and try to understand, so that when you do end up making a decision, or when you do end up reporting that information or sharing that information, that you do so honestly and with integrity, and that the information that you are sharing isn't going to hurt someone by omission, isn't going to do harm to anyone because of false information, right? Because in our society right now, we are doing that a lot, right? There's a lot of misinformation out there. And the most important thing that you can do when you get involved in looking at all of that information, all of that data, is to figure out whether or not it's real, and whether or not it's factual, and whether or not that person's opinion isn't trying to sway you one way or another, and whether or not it's going to have a positive or negative impact on you or your neighbor, or on somebody who lives 1,000 miles away. So, ask the questions, and if you're a good researcher, if you want to be a good anthropologist, ask the questions. Constantly ask the questions. Constantly try and understand why. Why are people doing this? And eventually you'll have, with enough information, a result that is good and appropriate and worthy of sharing. So, let's see. That's about it. We've already covered what I want you to do for the discussion. I want you to talk about and do an analysis of the film that I'm going to post. So that's the discussion, homework, reflection paper. It's same as always. And we talked about the paper. So if you have any questions about the paper, I'm going to refer you to the first video that I shared for everyone. Or email me, and I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. And yeah, I think that's about it. I will have because we need to talk about the final real quick, the final, which is in 3 weeks or so, will be the same format as the midterms. So 8 questions. One of them is going to be a short essay. 7 questions are going to be short answer. They'll be exactly the same, based on things that we have covered since the midterm. So we will not cover anything from before the midterm. So same format. And most of you did really well. So I'm happy with how things have turned out as far as that's going on. And then the paper, again, if you have questions, let me know. And for the final, I will have a guide for you the final week of class. So it'll be after the fall break. You will get the guide and you will have time to study up. The format for the final is going to be the same. I'm going to leave it open for finals week. So you'll have Monday through Friday to take the exam, and it'll be 2 hours. So you'll have 5 days to take it. You must take it within those 5 days. If there is a reason why you can't take it in those 5 days, you need to let me know, or it's got to be catastrophic. Please take it, plan for it. If you know you're going to be gone, make sure you try and do it early, because if it's late, it really makes things difficult, and getting your grades turned in becomes much more of a complication. So I highly, highly, highly advise you to make sure you can take it within those 5 days. Yeah, so plan for it. And, a lot of you did pretty well studying for the exam. Again, each one of those subjects that I list in the study guide, one of them will be a question on the final. So if you study all of them, you will succeed with the final. So, I don't do any trickery or anything like that. It's pretty straightforward. Yeah. Okay, that's it. Any questions, concerns, comments, please contact me. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. Yeah. Have a great break. I hope you stay home. Don't go visit family. This is not a time for family. I know it's Thanksgiving, but this is a pandemic, and we are just losing our goddamn minds. Everyone's being inappropriate, so please stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope that you have a great break. I hope that everything goes well in your other classes, and we will talk to you soon. Okay? Take it easy.